Hi!
Wow!
Didn't see you there.
Welcome, and welcome back to the Hipocritics podcast. I'm your co-host, Josiah.
And I'm your other co-host, Alex.
And today, we have a very
interesting topic today.
Yes.
Because it's something I've wanted to talk about since I've read for probably at least 2 years. And the title of the book we're reading today, we're doing a hard shift from video games to books, because we don't just play games. I think that's the smallest percent of what this podcast is going to be. Podcast. So we're going to be reading a book called Anthem by Ayn Rand. And just some general background on Ayn Rand. She is a very controversial figure, and she's both a political activist, a feminist, and one of the main to me, one of the feminists from the 60s that to me was really influential, and she's also a philosopher. She also writes, so she does it all. And some of her background too that I found really interesting, which was kind of bizarre, was she was born in Russia, and during her lifetime, she got famous for being a controversial figure. And during this time, she wrote several books. The most popular ones were Anthem, The Fountainhead, and Atlas Shrugged, which all talk about this perception of reality called objectivism, which speaks generally, I'm going from her website, so if you go to www.aynrand.org/ideas/overview, you can kind of get a perception of the type of person Ayn Rand was. Now, it's interesting because I don't agree completely with her philosophy, but there's parts of it that I agree with. So, I don't think the Hipocritics podcast is mainly gonna our goal is to not get on a soapbox and tell you conservatives and liberals, which one is better and all that. I think the goal of this podcast is to present ideas.
Right.
And, I think I'm a balanced person with all types of different perceptions about, politics and, I guess, religion or everything else. So to me, art is the thing that I'm trying to portray as well. So it's interesting because I went into the series thinking about how the series was incredible art piece of science fiction, but got interested in the political side of what she's explaining. So with all that being said, there's a site there's a page on her site called Advancing Your Potential, which basically states that you should follow reason, not whims. You should work hard to achieve your life purpose and productiveness, and earn a genuine self-esteem, pursue your own happiness through the highest moral aim, which in her mind, the way I'm understanding her principle is her highest moral aim is to pursue her own selfish endeavors. And what I could say is that her that is the a extremely polarized version of capitalism. And the last one she talked about is prosper by treating other individuals as trading value for value. So a lot of what she said and what she talked about, because she came from Russia, is the fact that people need to be less focused on the group and more focused on themselves. And if everyone was focused on their own ideals and being the best that they can be, the entire world and the entire country would become successful.
Right.
But because of people that she thinks are, I guess in a way, overly altruistic, that she kind of lumps those people in as parasites that are trying to disrupt this higher moral aim.
Yeah.
Now, I would agree with parts of those things, but I wouldn't say I'm a Ayn Rand, hardcore, this is exactly Ayn Rand was right, you know? Because I think she has some really interesting points to be made about society and politics and achieving your own happiness and achieving your your potential, but I don't think that we need to completely disregard altruism.
Right.
And if you would like to learn more of what happens when you do that, please play BioShock. Because BioShock is a fantastic interpretation of what that horrible world would be. It's anarchy. Even though it's extremely successful in the beginning, the morality of the world corrupted itself. Yeah. So, if you'd like to learn more about that, please play BioShock, because BioShock is heavily inspired by one of her works, being actually both of them. So it's The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Right. So that's kind of a general idea. She's a very I would say a shrewd businesswoman. And I used the word too, feminist, before. I think she's a true feminist. I don't think she's a perception. I think she wants women to achieve just as much as men can. Yeah. And I don't disagree with that. Objectivism is a philosophy for living on Earth. And she says, at the dawn of our lives, writes Rand, we seek a noble vision of man's nature and of life's potential. Rand's philosophy is that vision. Explore it for yourself. So it's kind of like this moral goal to achieve your only moral goal is to achieve your own potential and happiness and success, which I think is important. I don't think that's my only moral goal to do that, but I understand it. I want to be as successful as possible, and I want to put myself in situations like that. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah. I would just say it's interesting seeing from where she came from, especially from Russia during this time.
Yeah.
You're coming from, and as we get into the book, we're going to talk a lot about more like how it's very much the opposite of communism and socialism, in the sense of communism and socialism being all about what is best for the whole. Everybody is a part of one big body. Nobody is an individual. It's all about the idea of we, which is the exact opposite of what Ayn Rand stands for this whole book, Anthem, is about this idea that the we is evil and the I is good.
Right.
And so it's so interesting to me to see, especially for her as a woman in this time, to be presenting these ideas, whereas
mainly in the 60s and 50s.
Yeah.
Probably the 60s more. Sorry,
but yes, and it's interesting because when I think of somebody presenting these ideas, especially in this book, if I had read it and not known who the author was, I would have assumed it was a man, just because of the way capitalism and that kind of philosophy and political ideology tends to be men that I've seen
during that time period, right?
Well, even now.
Oh, you're right. You're absolutely right.
And so for me to see Ayn Rand as a woman portraying all these ideas, it's very interesting to me. And I think it comes from these two opposites, and I think they're both very important. I think there should be a balance, like all things.
I agree.
And I feel like she makes some good points. And she's seen the worst of the we. She's seen the worst of socialism and communism, and so she's like, this can't possibly be good. So she sees this other idea, the opposite, as being true, and so she sticks by that. And I see a problem in if you're on the end of both sides, either one is wrong in some ways. But in some ways it's good. There's good things from both sides.
Do you think, this is kind of an interesting question before we get into the book, do you think she's a product of her times? Or do you think she's both a product of her times and a visionary? Because I think she is. Yeah. I think she is a product of socialism and the destruction of socialism and also communism in Russia. But at the same time, I think some of her ideas have transcended culture and are even still appropriate for today. Yeah. And again, the goal of this podcast is not to tell you which political side is right, because that's not the point of this, and we don't subscribe to doing that. You can go watch any other news source for that. This is about art and how art affects us. Yeah. So Do you have any other main points about Ayn Rand you want to bring up?
I also want to talk about, and as we get more into like what, I guess we kind of talked about what objectivism is here, but I feel like a lot of what her ideology is about is tends to relate to the idea that everyone, what is best for them is the same for everyone, and it's not always the case.
Yeah.
And I think one of her main flaws is that there are going to be some people who what's best for them is to destroy many of the people around them, and I don't think that's right. But I think that's all about Ayn Rand. I think we're going to jump into the book.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure you had everything you had to say, because there's so much to talk about with Ayn Rand, and there's so many books that she's written. The genre of this story is definitely science fiction. I could even classify it as dystopian science fiction, but I think mainly science fiction, and we have a list of talking points. So the book today, again, is Anthem.
Right.
Which has a lot to say, and it's actually a pretty small book, and I've read it a couple years ago, and
it's technically a novella.
Joe read it a while back.
Yeah.
And actually more recently, right?
I read it. Okay. Yeah, I read it recently, a couple of weeks ago, maybe even just 2 weeks ago.
So I think the goal is to summarize it. It's been out for a very, very long time, so I don't feel bad about spoiling it.
Yeah, we're gonna spoil it if you haven't read it. Just letting you know.
So the story of Anthem takes place in an unspecified future time and place, which the freedom and individual rights have been obliterated by something. They don't really say what it is, and so there's this perception of collectivism that is a political. It's basically, I would say at this point with this culture, it's a religion.
Yeah. It's
a political figure, like a political movement, and also like a deep cultural shift.
Yeah.
So I would say it's all three. Like it's dominant. There's no free thinking in this society. And there's a global dictatorship of kind of a fascist or communist variety.
Yeah.
So the main character's name is interesting, and I want to address one thing very upfront, is the fact that this character, his name is, it's a mouthful, Equality 7-2521. That's the name of the main character. So it's just like, what the heck?
Yeah.
He's a street sweeper. I think there's context for a street sweeper also being very, but it's not like a glorified position in any culture.
Yeah.
All the characters in this world, in this culture, refer to themselves as we. It's like a hive mind. It's like they have no idea of individualism. So this main character is basically having an identity crisis, and this person's trying to understand why we, or he is. Because he calls us, throughout the book, he's constantly calling himself we.
Yeah.
He's interested, he doesn't want to be a street sweeper. He wants to be a philosopher?
Scientist.
That's right, he wanted to be a scientist. So he's having this issue where he is hardcore debating the culture and the world and the politics. And
at the time, he kind of just sucks it up. I remember in the book, as soon as, essentially how the dystopia works is everybody's assigned a job, and whoever assigns it is trusted to give the job to whoever it is that's needed the most. That was weird worded, but
like basically like the job is not by skill based at all.
Right.
It's like
this is what we need.
You randomly are chosen to be a street sweeper, or you're randomly chosen to be a leader, or you're randomly chosen to be an architect, and there's no idea of there's no choice.
Right. Yeah. And at that moment, he's like, right before he gets a job, he really, really wants to be a scientist.
Yeah.
And as soon as it's given to him, he's like grateful that he isn't a scientist, because the whole time, and I like that you mentioned that the government and that society is almost like a religion.
Yeah.
Because the whole book he talks about like, oh, I've sinned because I've thought for myself. I've sinned because I made a choice of preference. Like I preferred something. And at that moment he's like grateful, and he starts crying out of gratitude because he like to absolve for the sins that he's made by preferring something. And so he's okay with being a street sweeper for a long time. And he even in his like being a collective, he keeps his individualism in his head, and without speaking anything, he's able to communicate to another human being that they're friends in a really weird way.
I would say the biggest preference he had is obviously he meets this woman called Liberty 5-3000, which is to me is the rolls off your tongue, that name.
Oh, right.
So she's a young woman. She's very beautiful, and men and women are forbidden to take notice of each other. They can't engage in any type of romantic activity. They have a time of mating, which is a period which they can, So anyway, he meets this woman, and he's immediately like, I've sinned by even looking at you, by even talking to you, is what they say. And he's all these forbidden thoughts he has to kind of bottle up. And so he's interested in checking out and leaving, even thinking like the idea is set that like he can't continue in this. He can't live.
Right.
And I think today, like culturally, we are so stuck. Like, this is the only way I can do this. I can't go outside of this. So that was important to me. So there's this thing called the uncharted forest, which they're exploring, that he's considering exploring, but he's so ingrained in this culture that he can't get out.
Yeah.
So the world itself is corrupt, and there's people that were executed. There's a person that was burned at the stake for basically just having individualistic ideas.
Yeah, this idea comes up, and this is when it starts to. It's kind of like a mystery at first, and by the end you figure it out. He's learning about this idea of an unspoken word, or an unforgivable word. It's like the ultimate sin is this word. And the only time he's ever heard about it is this man who learned it and then was burned at the stake for knowing it. And you later find out at the end that word is I. Like, they don't even have it in their vocabulary.
Right.
And if they, the whole time the book is written, like with we and they, and you don't see I until the very end, and everything shifts when it does, and that like completely enforces Ayn Rand's idea of like the individualism and the power of I versus we as almost ideologies. And it before a lot of this happens, he comes across this discovery with his friend of this like basement. Or a tunnel. And
he pulls this grate off of it.
And it's the first time he finds out that this is tunnel sewer system, and there he's able to be in peace and alone for the first time ever. He's always surrounded by people, and for the first time, because he's alone, he's able to contemplate the idea of himself instead of a group as a whole.
And he starts experimenting in this environment, and it's like this dingy little hole in this. To me, like I saw it, I thought of like this. It's in this rock because they have these big walls of stone in my head. But then like he pulls this grate off this little hole in the wall. Yeah. And it's away from everything. And he always go at night to this place. Pulls the grate off, rolls it to the side, goes in, and he starts learning about chemistry and alchemy, and he starts messing around. He uses light. He creates light for the first time with fire, and he mixes different types of metals and does alchemy and substances. So he's trying to just learn. He's trying to have like an actual interest in something that's not street sweeping or this ridiculous perception of society that he has to adhere to. So he creates light for the first time, and he goes to the world of scholars, which is kind of this area where all the big political / I'd say religious figures come together, and it's almost like I would say like a hall and he shows them this light, and I think that's all symbolic as well. He's like I made this, I've created this, I've discovered this, and they're shocked because they call him an evil wretch because they're showing him a way to produce fire that's not candles.
Right.
And in this culture, it took them like 50 years to approve the fact that people could make candles.
Right.
So it's completely bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And so this discovery of candles is handled by the Department of Candles, and the confusion basically it caused confusion with the plans for the World Council, and it took 50 years for this to get approved. So now they can use candles, but basically they consider this light an evil thing that must be destroyed.
Yeah.
Which is like hilarious. Like that's just stupid.
It's interesting to me because like in this world they set the idea of it's only good if the whole collective can come up with it. If only one person can come up with it, then clearly it's evil. Like anything that is not good for the whole. Well, what blows my mind is even though it is good for the whole, and he talks about, okay, I don't care what happens to me, but use this for the good of humanity. They refuse it because they say if all of humanity couldn't come up with it, then it's clearly not good for all of us.
It's like it has to be taken as gospel over 50 years to be approved.
Yeah.
Like it can't. Like it's just any new ideas are evil.
Yeah.
Anything that's counterculture is evil, and to me that's a sin in of itself. Like that's like a huge, to me that's such a terrible way of thinking about life.
Yeah.
So then he awakens, and he's like, "This is ridiculous. Like you guys are you're full of it." So he decides he cannot live in this society when he's in this hall with all these, like it kind of looks like judges looking down on him. Yeah. And he jumps through a window. He like busts through the window with his light. You know, that symbolic representation of his individualistic thinking, and runs off into the woods. Then he wakes up in the forest, like later, like he rests in the forest. He's in this uncharted forest. He's walking along and realizes that there's somebody following him. And it turns out to be the woman, I'm not going to say that name again because it's just too long. So it's this woman, and he changes. He's like, you know what? I don't want this name anymore. So he changes her name to the Golden One because of. To me, like in my head, I thought of her hair being golden color. Too. So they get romantic a little bit, and he realizes that there's a connection with men and women that he's never experienced before, and they continue in the uncharted forest together, and do you want to pick up from here?
Yeah. From there, they end up running into some ruins of this what was the old civilization before what they call the unmentionable times.
Yeah.
And it's essentially, it's interesting to me because the dystopian they're in now is essentially in the future, but it's in the dark ages. Yeah. So it's like humanity has retraced. Yeah. Or gone back from the advancements that we have now. And so they go into this ancient ruin, which is technically modern because of the way it works, but and they go in and they find things like mirrors, which didn't exist in society as a we, because then you would be able to tell that you're an individual. Right. And so he eventually keeps looking, and they look through the house and they claim it as their own, and he finds books.
For the first time.
And what all the books in the dystopian society were written by rewritten by scripters who were assigned the job, and so none of them had the word I in it. But these books, since they were written from the unmentionable times, from the past, all of them had the word I in it. And suddenly he discovers, after reading these books, the idea of the individual. And I. He learns the word I. And from this moment, the book, it changes chapters, and the book switches tone. And it goes from him being like, you can tell it's almost a more simple writing style.
Yeah.
To as soon as he learns the word I, it becomes much more intellectual. Like you can tell there's a shift in tone of he's more confident and sure of himself. He feels like almost like he's a god at this point. Yeah, and
a little much.
And and at some point later in the book, towards the end, he's like, "Oh, I am a god."
Yeah, he really goes a little crazy.
Yeah. And with the whole thing with the light, he ends up reading in these books. He reads pretty much all of them, and if not all of them, and he decides that their names aren't good anymore, and they need to name each other things, or he needs to name himself and her something to be able to be individuals. And he names himself Prometheus, which is super symbolic, because Prometheus in Greek mythology was the one who brought fire to humanity. And in this, he's the bringer of the fire, the bringer of the light, the individualistic light. And then for the golden one, the woman, he gives her the name Gaia, who is the goddess of and also the mother of the earth, traditionally in many mythologies.
She has a child.
Oh yeah.
You know, like they actually have a kid who's the first kind of firstborn of this new society of free humans. And it's beautiful. I want to say, like, there's 2 points that shift with the shift from we to I, where he's realizing that I can be an individual. I have an identity. I have a purpose besides the whole, the group. Yeah. That is the way that he portrays that, and the way that he discovers culture and books, and he's never seen himself, like the mirrors, he just sees himself for the first time. And he's like, wow, I'm very attractive, like I'm a good looking guy, and he realizes that he can be confident is like a beautiful thing, and I think everyone goes through that in their own way. And it's not like we do that specific thing, usually, but it's symbolic of people realizing their identity. And then the way that they just describe their relationship, how he discovers his romantic side of his personality and their relationship is absolutely beautiful. Like especially in the forest, when they are just getting to know each other as individuals, even before they realize they're individuals, is like in the way that she just, like, Ayn Rand describes this forest just beautifully. Like, it's this lush, amazing, colorful place that's the opposite. Because when I listened and read the story, I thought of their environments being stone and boring, no color, just everything looks the same. And they get into this beautiful I started thinking of like fall colors, and I started in my head, I saw fall leaves and just a beautiful forest to get lost in with someone, so that perception of being romantic and discovering your own identity in romance was extremely interesting, and spoke a lot to me. So they have Gaia and the child. I don't think they actually had a name for the child. I think he just called that. And so Prometheus discovers that he wants to take people. He wants to show people this vision.
He wants to be the real Prometheus, in the sense of, just like Prometheus brought fire to the people, he wants to bring what he's discovered to light. People. Yes. And so he wants to go back into society, or bring them to him, and then eventually be able to integrate it into the rest of humanity. And I love that they gave him this name, and he goes a little bit...
He goes pretty egotistical.
Yeah, but I think for Ayn Rand that's important, because that's what she wants to portray, is like, when you get this confidence, this is what you should feel like, in that sense, and it's empowering. That's a good way to phrase it. Yeah. Because I was listening to the book, and it's describing going, basically near the end, we're getting kind of close to the end of the book, he's like, I want to go back. I want to show people this light that I've found
and I want to show people this time. I want to bring back society to the time before this it's called the unmentionable times in the other world where everybody's oppressed. And he goes basically at the end of the book, he's like, I am ego.
Yeah.
And I am God.
Yeah.
Which is Ayn Rand. It's Ayn
Rand.
Rand's philosophy. Yeah.
Like,
That's kind of over the top for me to chew on. It seems a little much. But I understand kind of like her perception of where she's coming from, because that's basically like she thinks that self-interest is basically like
true religion.
It's like true faith in a way.
There you go,
I would say true faith and true virtue. Yeah. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So it's true virtue to be completely self-absorbed, which I don't agree with it. But, and again, like it's a type of philosophy.
Right.
To me, the most important thing in the book isn't really that thing where she's like, I'm God. Right. It's more about unlocking your potential in yourself and pursuing that potential.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in thinking that I'm God. I'm more interested in making sure I'm doing everything possible to pursue my ambitions, which is totally fine.
Right. You know, I think what's good about it, one of the things that I got out of it a lot was this idea of his huge shift as soon as he gets that confidence. Yeah. I think that's really important for people to have. And I feel like a lot of society and people often almost shame that idea of you shouldn't be confident in who you are. And there's a lot of inspirational posts that'll be like, oh, you be you, like be confident. Right. But when it happens in realistic situations, people often are like, at least in my life, it's almost like, don't be proud, like confidence is
pretentious.
Yeah, well, it's almost like confidence is almost seen as pride, and there's a difference.
There really is.
And I think it's very important to have confidence in who you are, and that gives you a lot of the ability to be better and be able to improve yourself and do and accomplish your goals. And I think that's really important to have, and that's really good, something that she kind of points out that our society kind of,
does a terrible job with.
Yeah.
Its self-identity, especially with millennials, is terrible.
Yeah.
Like, it's because of, I guess, our generation and a lot of different things in the economy. There's a huge epidemic of people that don't know what they want to do, and some of that's just going through life, though. You know, and I think this story is interesting. I think the way she writes is really interesting because anyone can relate to this. Yeah. Like, anyone could be, this character can be Prometheus in this culture and be like, where's my place? I know I felt that. Yeah. And how do I negotiate this culture and where I live with its inherent flaws with my ambition to be everything I need to be.
Right. I think it's interesting for me because I feel if I were to place myself in Prometheus's shoes, I would be at this point in my life where, okay, I was told like what job to get, where to go to school, where to go for college. Yeah. And I was on this path, and then something happened and like I decided to think differently, and suddenly it's different from what the rest of the culture wants, and suddenly I'm finding myself wandering in this uncharted forest, and I don't know where I'm going yet. And that's like where I am personally in my life, and that's how I like relate. But it's interesting that even though some of these ideas are so almost radical, like you're still able to place yourself in these shoes, even if our society isn't necessarily that bad, right? Or that in that situation, these circumstances are very personable.
I think they are, and I think they're applicable. Yeah. I think they're something where you can constantly ask yourself, have I arrived? Because like I'm in a different place with my career, but like I still am like wondering, is this everything? Have I found my new time? Right. Have I broken through the trends of this culture? Yeah. And how have I discovered this new? Have I found my books and my mirrors and my scientific discoveries and my light? Because I think that's a constant thing we're doing.
Yeah.
So this story, even if you're in your career, even if you're in your place where you have found that thing, or you found the person you're supposed to be with for the rest of your life, or you've found something, is that everything?
Right.
Or are we all just seeking for something deeper than that? So I think it's interesting in that regard. So it's a really good story. It's short.
Yeah,
I still
really
say you
short.
can read it. I mean, we kind of went through it, but there's so much detail in the writing.
It's really good.
And the whole thing, like when you first read this book, you're like, these people are insane.
Yeah.
The way that they're referring to themselves as we is just bizarre.
It gets your attention very quickly.
So it's good.
It's a very good read. It's a very good read. It's very quick too.
Yeah.
Alex, I read very quickly.
I wish I read as fast as you do.
But and yeah, Alex didn't have a hard time at all reading through it. It's interesting to me thinking about some of Ayn Rand's ideas and philosophy in it seems almost like this is her alma mater. I'm trying to think of the term where it's like, this is what I believe type thing.
Yeah.
And this is why, like, she created this dystopian society as the worst of the worst of socialism.
Yeah.
And then it's so interesting to me that earlier you mentioned BioShock, and it took the exact same thought that Ayn Rand had, but applied it to her own philosophy.
Yeah.
In the sense of, okay, but if we also use your philosophy for everything in an entire society, we also end up with a disaster. You know,
a horrible disaster.
Yeah, like the worst thing ever.
BioShock is kind of an atrocity. And then, just so you know, like Andrew Ryan and Ayn Rand are their anagrams. So that Andrew Ryan is Ayn Rand in BioShock, and Andrew Ryan is the leader of this city. Yeah, and
he's awful.
He's
in case you don't know the game, he's
definitely self-absorbed to a fault.
Yeah,
and it's interesting to see his relationship, because I read another book called just BioShock. I believe it's just called BioShock Rapture, and you discover his entire background and his philosophy. So I don't know. This is a really hard book to rate for me, because it's so meaningful to me, and it's more meaningful to me as a work of philosophy than a story. Yeah. The story to me is very simple and very like. It is. I would say. I don't want to phrase it the wrong way. I don't want you to sound like I'm saying it's cliche, because this I think at the time
it wasn't at all.
This was so new. Yeah. I've seen this kind of story depicted similarly, but this depiction is completely stands out to me because of how everything has this second meaning. It's so, the philosophy is just dripping out of this. And I think, to me, it's a philosophy book that's written as a narrative, as opposed to a narrative book that's written with philosophy in it. Yeah. So I would give it, I don't know, I don't want to just rate it, but I'd say like at least an 8. Yeah. I like it. I don't think it's the best story, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I really like the way that she phrases and writes it a lot. Yeah. She uses very simple language at the beginning, I want to say. And it's very easy to understand. And then as soon as everything's intentional, and I love at the end of, at least the copy I had that I borrowed from Alex. Yeah. There's her notes in the back. And you can see where she's crossed out and added and changed different things.
So it's like the entire book with her scribbles in it. Yeah. So it's interesting to read really them. Cool. And then look at like, oh, well, I changed this word to this. Oop, I accidentally used I here. Yeah. Cross that out, put we. Yeah. And I think like that has a lot of, because you get into kind of like her writing process, which I'm sure she did. She didn't show people that for a long time. Yeah, I'm sure. So.
But I thought that was really cool. And then I love the tonal shift when he discovers the I. Like, that's written really, really well.
It's so good. I think it'd be a cool movie.
Yeah, it would.
And I'd
be short, but
I like a short film.
Yeah.
And they actually, it's interesting because like going back to Fountainhead, and Atlas Shrugged, because they did this really weird depiction of Atlas Shrugged where it's two or three movies. Yeah. Each movie has different people in every role. So like the main character is the same in the main character, but it's a different actor.
Really?
Yeah, it's so weird. Like it's like they couldn't get the same people to be in it, which
weird.
is really weird and bizarre to me, but also kind of interesting because I'm like, okay, how you can see different sides of this character by a different person, but it must be really confusing to watch.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think to me the book. It's so funny because we're eating lemon cake and drinking tea right now, and we're reading this. I feel like I've ascended, like as an art podcast, because we're finally
talking about books
and drinking tea.
This is gonna be. I need to rate it first before we get in.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Rate it, and then we'll have some final thoughts. But I want to give it probably an 8. I think 8's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, because this story was pretty simple, but I really like the writing and some of the choice things, and it's very applicable.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is going to be more of like what we are going to talk about from now on.
Yeah.
This is going to be more of the format. It's going to be shorter. We're going to have something specific.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like E3 all the time.
E3 games, news,
or
everything.
memes. Yeah, it's going to be it's going to be like this. We're going to have different things that we want to talk about, different movies. We have. I think next week we're going to talk about music.
We are.
Yes.
We might even have some guests coming and music and how. I mean, I'm a musician. Joe is a musician, and we have some other friends that are musicians, and how music affects us, and how because of our different instruments or writing style, we listen to music differently and also like portray it differently in our minds.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be really cool.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about like we tend to look at music differently.
Yeah.
And
Psychology.
And it's going to be really good. I'm really looking forward to that.
And we're kicking around the idea of this movie called Her.
Oh, yes.
Which is a film about identity again, but
a different way.
We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
I'm just excited because that's one of my favorite movies ever.
Yeah, it's gonna be really good too.
Thank you so much for tuning in. I know this is a little bit different from last show.
Yeah.
What was that?
It was,
I was
something.
Just for context, I was in Kentucky filming marketing for my job, so we kind of threw together a bunch of memes. And I thought it was funny.
What
I don't
else
know.
would you ever want? It was a masterpiece.
It was truly my Mona Lisa.
You're right. Mona Lisa of
Our
trash.
Mona Lisa, yeah. Lisa.
You're right.
And I've been Alex.
I've been Joe.
And you've been listening to the Hipocritics podcast. Looking forward to hearing from you guys. Let us know too if there's anything that's been inspired to you or brought up these themes for you. Or if you played BioShock, like please just play BioShock.
Every podcast Alex is going to end with, please play BioShock.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right. Bye.
Bye.